Trigger warning. This podcast episode features discussions of emotional and narcissistic abuse, physical abuse, and LGBTQ themes, specifically transgender issues and gender identity. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Emotional Abuse is Real. I'm your host, Sarene Leeds, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm so excited to get into today's episode, but as always, a few requests. First of all, please make sure you're subscribed to this podcast on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Second, please follow me on Instagram at Sarene Leeds Writes. That's SareneLeedsWrites. And also please follow our Facebook page, Emotional Abuse is Real. Links are provided in the show notes. I also have a gift to share with you. Remember how I said I was cooking up a brand new freebie? Well, 10 Things I Learned from Getting Paid to Watch TV is now available for you to download. This is a collection of some of my best writing tips and tricks, all of which I learned from covering television. Plus, when you sign up for this free download, you'll be automatically subscribed to my weekly newsletter. My newsletter is a great opportunity to stay up to date on my latest published articles, new podcast episodes, and to connect with me if you're a business or brand owner. Did you know that in addition to my journalism work, I'm a professional writer specializing in website and email copy? Well, now you do. And if you're in the market for someone who can make your business copy sparkle, I'd love to talk to you further. The sign-up link for my free download, 10 Things I Learned from Getting Paid to Watch TV, is available in both the show notes and on my website, SareneLeedsWrites.com. Speaking of my website, are you mulling over possibly hiring me to do some fabulous copy work? Hey, that's awesome. But don't just rely on my own self-promotion. You can find several glowing client testimonials over on SareneLeedsWrites.com as well. That's SareneLeedsWrites.com. I've left the link for my website in the show notes. As for the podcast, this is your friendly reminder that if you're a listener and you'd like to share your story on Emotional Abuse is Real, please don't hesitate to reach out via Instagram, via our Facebook page, or via email at hello@SareneLeedsWrites.com. Anonymous guests are always welcome. Another way you can support Emotional Abuse is Real is by heading over to Apple Podcasts and both leaving a 5-star rating and writing a review. The more reviews we get, the easier it is for people to find this podcast. Finally, please consider donating to our Buy Me a Coffee page, which I've linked in the show notes. As I've said before, this is a one-woman operation, and your donations help fund the podcast's production costs. If you can, please share this podcast with anyone who might benefit from it. I truly do believe that we are building a community of survivors with emotional abuse is real. And the more awareness we raise, the easier it will be for victims to come forward. My guest for today's episode is V.L. Brunskill. She is an emotional and narcissistic abuse survivor and the author of The Killing Closet, a memoir released in late 2023. The Killing Closet is a harrowing story of the abuse Brunskill, as well as her adoptive mother and brother, suffered at the hands of her adoptive father back in the 1960s and 1970s. In addition, Brunskill's father would eventually come out as transgender later in life. I do want to offer a warning here that throughout our conversation, Brunskill and I do switch back and forth between pronouns when referring to her father. This is not to be disrespectful of the LGBTQ community. We do this because for much of her life, Brunskill only knew her father as a man. When we do discuss Brunskill's father's later years, we do use she, her pronouns. Also, please note that even though we're already in January 2024, we did record this interview back in December, and I decided to leave in Brunskill's holiday greeting because it's just a lovely message that was worth sharing with you all. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with V.L. Brunskill.
Thank you so much for having me. I am V.L. Brunskill. I'm the author of 2 books, Waving Backwards, a novel, and my latest is The Killing Closet, and that is my memoir, and I think that's probably what we're going to chat a lot about today.
We sure are.
And I'm also a former music journalist, so I spent 10 years in Boston interviewing all the fabulous musicians that came through there in the crazy 90s, so...
You've written your memoir called The Killing Closet, which was released in November. So the best word I can use to describe this book is searing. It is an in-depth look at the harrowing abuse committed by your adoptive father. You were a victim, as were your adoptive mother and your adoptive brother. There was physical abuse, as well as emotional and narcissistic abuse. And while I realize that you do tell your story in the book, and we're talking about the book so people will know about it and hopefully pick it up, and but the strength of this podcast is really in the survivor stories. So I would like to give you the floor now to share your experiences as the daughter of a narcissistic abuser.
Sure. And, it's interesting that you wanted to talk more about the emotional abuse, I think, right?
Yes, that is what this podcast is about. It's about emotional and narcissistic abuse because the purpose of this podcast is to raise more awareness of that specific kind of abuse. And I saw that narcissistic abuse throughout your memoir.
Absolutely. Yep. And that's why I was very interested in this podcast also, because I was adopted as an infant into through the New York State one of the agencies at 7 months old into this family, and there were already signs of abuse within the family before I got there, and that's what the book kind of tells the pre-story as well.
Yes.
And my father abused, my mother was the victim of domestic abuse already. And then they adopted us, my brother and I. My brother was adopted 3 years later through the same agency. And they adopted us kind of to heal their marriage, I think. And it went the opposite way. And my brother and my mother were the victims of most of the physical abuse.
Yes.
I was not physically abused. However, you cannot live in a home with that kind of abuse going on and not have it be emotional abuse.
Yeah.
The way I reacted to the emotional abuse was, I have a picture of myself as an infant. It's the only picture I have pre-adoption, and my fists are up. And I feel like that is how I survived. I had those fists up from birth.
Yeah. I am so sorry that you went through this. And just the fact that you've been able to write about it, I hope that it's been a healing process for you.
It was absolutely healing. It gave me a way to kind of let it go. I originally wrote the book out of anger.
Yeah.
I decided that some people had inherited my father's things and my childhood home. And when I found out, I was devastated. And because, of course, I felt like through all the abuse that we survived, we really had earned inheritance of those things.
Sure.
And I decided to write down everything that happened. And then I went back to it as I was kind of grieving my father's death and kind of figuring out what I really thought about all of this. And then the book changed from anger to healing.
I'm really pleased to hear that because I know that after anyone has been through any form of abuse, it's almost like a where do I go from here question, so were you, in addition to writing the book, were you able, what other things did you do to help yourself heal? Did you seek therapy? Did you work with a coach?
I have done therapy in the past.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't really effective for me because I want actions. I'm action
Yeah.
oriented. And so
Yeah.
I talking about it, prior to writing the book, I did talk to people about this. So there were people
Mm-hmm.
that knew about this, and it was just part of my makeup. And I never really thought about, and not to say therapy is not important. It's very important
Yeah.
if it works for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I feel like
Yeah.
for me, it wasn't as effective as it could have been, perhaps because of my personality being
Mm-hmm.
quite strong.
Mm-hmm. Well, I admire that you know yourself so well that you can see that and to seek out other forms of healing. And
Mm-hmm.
as you said, that's what this book ended up being for you. The other thing I do want to touch upon is the fact that later in life you discovered that your father was transgender.
Yes.
Yeah. I, and that being from a much older generation, there was almost zero understanding about being transgender,
Mm-hmm.
LGBTQ for him. So I'm sure that exacerbated his behavior. But for me, I mean, I just want to say for me that element really just seemed like another layer of his existence and your experience. It doesn't seem to me that was the reason why he was abusive, because he was just abusive.
Right. I think it
Yeah.
was upbringing, right? So my father was
Sure.
raised 19, born in the 40s,
Mm-hmm.
raised in New York City by two German first generation Americans.
Yeah.
All right, right from Germany, very, very strict. They used a belt in their hands quite
Yeah.
often to
Yeah.
control their children, including him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that so when I was first adopted, my father was not abusive with me.
Mm-hmm.
And then when my brother was brought into the situation, that's when it escalated.
Yeah.
And so, as you look back at it, that certainly being transgender was not the reason my father was the only reason my father abused us.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
I want
Because
to be
it's,
very clear about
and I'm
that.
glad. And also from reading the book, because I felt like going in, I'll admit, going into it, I was like, oh, well, of course this happened because he didn't know what to do with these feelings. There was no support for someone like him. And
Mm-mm. No,
yeah, yeah,
no. Partially, I mean, that had to exacerbate the rage, right? So that
of course.
that had to be part of it, but that was not the whole thing. There were definitely signs of sociopathic behavior. That's my father was,
Yes.
as you know from reading it.
Yes.
So there was a lot more going on than that, and my brother coming into it. Of course, if my father knew her whole life that
Mm-hmm.
she was a woman
Yeah.
in that mindset and having no place to put that, and then a boy is brought into the house,
Yeah.
perhaps some hate towards that masculinity because there was hate towards her own masculinity.
Yeah.
So there is and it took a long time for me to sit back and look at what happened to us and to know, and people, initially people didn't want to publish this book because they said, well, you can't have a transgender person who's, this raging sociopath
Ugh,
also. And I said,
yeah.
there's different, if we're going to be equal with all people, and as we should be, there's going to be great people who are transgender, and there's going to be some people that are not so great that are transgender.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. Unfortunately, I don't think this is going to end up on the list of books that people should read if they want to help increase pride for the LGBTQ community.
No, it's not going to be on that list. However,
No.
if you also look at it from the point of view, though, and I always, when I was writing it, I sat back and looked at it afterwards. There are some lessons in there on what not to do in terms of your own children,
Yeah.
and the killing closet obviously refers to, the title refers to my father being in the closet, also me
Sure.
being a child and hiding in the closet with my father's gun and ready
Yeah.
to take him out when he came home from work. So
Yeah.
it's there. But, I've had people read it that have said, it reminds them of kind of some of the control problems that their parents had with them as children, how they
Mm-hmm.
over controlled them, and you need to allow people to be who they are. And I think
Yes.
that if my father had come a different generation and to different parents,
Yeah.
then she may have been she her whole life and had a wonderful
Exactly.
life and not married my mom and not adopted children, and it would have been a whole different world. So some of the lessons should be and I hope the theme comes across that,
Absolutely.
yeah, we need to let people be who they are because they know who
Absolutely.
they are.
Absolutely. And also because just from reading it, I, there weren't too many opportunities for me to feel badly for your father. Only in the sense of her upbringing. I know I want to make sure that I eventually switch to the correct pronouns here.
Yeah, we'll be all
Yeah,
over the place probably. And
yeah.
apologies for that.
Well, no, I mean it's, but this actually brings me to my point. She did not transition until very late in life. She was not able to live her true self until, in many ways, the very end. It seems. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So
And although and it's funny, I said to my uncle, I asked him, I said, "Well, you knew Joe after the transition, and
right.
was Joe a better person?" And my uncle
Yeah.
said, "No, no."
Yeah. I was I didn't get that sense either, but like you said, if only she had been given the opportunity her to live in her truth.
Right. And
It
as everyone should be, right?
absolutely. And I did appreciate there were a couple of acknowledgments in the book about how as a young boy your father would what was it? He would dress in like his grandmother's clothes. It was something like
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't know about that until I was interviewing my mom for the book, right? So
Wow.
my
Yeah.
adopted mom, I interviewed her, and she said, "Well, I said, "Were there any signs, Mom?" And she said, "Well, he used to like me to stay heavy set." He said, and I said, she said, "I always thought later that maybe that was because she wanted to wear my clothing." Right? And
Ah.
then also that the best time that he shared with, or my father shared with her, was dressing with his grandmother, dressing up and
Yeah.
dancing around with her to the German music and all of that good stuff. So and then I remember my father at Halloween once dressing
Hmm.
up as a woman, and I don't think I'd ever seen him more joyful. But it's all
Right.
in hindsight. You
Of
don't know it,
course.
and
Of
it's all in
course.
hindsight. It becomes clear.
Yes, and that's something that I've been finding in this podcast, even with my own personal experience. So much has been in hindsight. Yeah, my emotional abuser was my boss at Rolling Stone, and he, my therapist would tell me that he was emotionally abusing me, but I still didn't quite understand it. And yes, I eventually left. I eventually got away from him, but we're now 9 years later, and I think that it's only now that I have the best understanding of what I went through. And I decided I'm going to start this podcast because it took me so long to really understand what I went through. So I appreciate your saying that, because I want my listeners to know that it takes time for you to truly understand what's happening.
100%. And I'm sorry you went through that.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's just, I did not, it's funny, not until this book just came out
Hmm.
did I kind of step back and say, okay, yeah, this is not everyone's childhood, right? So this is,
Yeah.
so it is kind of unusual, and people are shocked by it, and it just becomes your normal, right? Because it's what you had. But only looking back at it, and now I am not a youngster, right? I'm in my 50s now.
Yeah.
And so, only now that this book has come out and I kind of see it in print and have really had to dig down and think about how to talk about this book to people, because I can't say, well, here's a fun read for your Christmas enjoyment or holiday enjoyment. It's not that.
No, well, I feel the same way whenever I promote this podcast. I was like, catch up over the weekend, listen to these people's stories. But I know that telling these stories is crucial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. People need to share it so that, well, also so that the people who are potentially the abusers, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe we can get some awareness so that people that are doing the damage can see themselves mirrored.
I hope for that. But one thing I have learned, and that's what's problematic and troubling about narcissistic and emotional abusers, is that they really can't see themselves truly. We can always hope that they will, but I mean, if I'm able to do that, wonderful. But my goal is to help raise awareness with people who just don't know that this type of abuse exists, and also people who are in these toxic situations. I want them to have hope, to know that they're not alone and that there is help out there and that they can extract themselves from these situations. That it is possible, even if it is like it was for you, a parental figure.
You can escape.
You can escape, even if you may have to wait until you're a certain age.
Right.
But it is possible. So
it is possible.
Yeah. So what conclusions have you come to about your father now that you've written the book and that he's passed on? That she's passed on.
That's okay.
Sorry.
It's going to be like that throughout.
Yeah.
Conclusions. My father was mentally ill.
Yeah.
My father had mental illness because of abuse, and so it was, the abused became an abuser.
Yep. Very common.
You can love and hate someone at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's especially when it's the parent who is the abuser.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Yeah. And it was hard for me to get to the point where, look, I'm going to admit to everyone, here's my book. And I loved my father, loved him.
Absolutely.
But he didn't live up to what he should have been as a father.
Yeah. I'm glad that you're here to talk about this, because I have had a few guests and their abuser was their parent. And I think that, like I was saying before, I think that some people out there think, well, it's my parent. I can't separate. I can't have something. I can't come to my own conclusions. So I have to just go along with the way that the parent is. And I just want people to know that, like you just said, you can love your parent, but still acknowledge that they are harmful to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that was the balance my whole life, right? Well, my whole even after we had escaped, we went to a shelter for battered women and children.
Yeah.
And that's how we got out. And even long after that, and I'm married, I have my own child. I would kind of go back and forth, wanting that relationship, but still not wanting to have damage. I didn't want my daughter around anything dysfunctional. I thought, let's end this somewhere. And so had actually, stopped communication.
Yeah. And I know that that's a really difficult decision for people to make. And it depends on the person. And I've had many conversations on this podcast about what people have to weigh in order to do what's best for them. And in many cases, no contact is the way to go. But again, I'm glad that we're all sharing these stories, because I don't want this to be a hard line, like you must go no contact, because it really depends on the situation.
No, because now, okay, I look back now and I think, and everyone's like, you had every reason in the world not to speak to this person.
Yeah.
When they read the book,
true.
right? But
Yes.
however, I feel like it would have done my heart good, my soul good, to let Jo be Joanne in my presence, and let her have that healing. And even if that was uncomfortable for me because of the past with Jo, I think that there's something to be said for that last meeting when your parents are elderly, and even if they weren't, terrific people in the world, it's kind of gives everybody some peace, in my opinion.
Sure. So I know that you've reconnected with your birth family. I'd love to give you an opportunity to talk about how that's been for you. What is your relationship now with your birth family?
I was reunited about 27 years ago, so I've known them for a very long time.
That's wonderful.
Thank you. I found my birth father and my birth mother pre-internet, so that was an interesting search.
Oh, wow.
And pre-DNA.
How do you do something like that?
I had a letter of non-identifying information from the adoption agency. It said things like, your mother was from Canada. Her brother was a wireless operator in the Canadian service. Her other brother did this. Her parents did this, and it listed out careers. And so I must have read that letter 1,000 times, and I had a search angel that worked with me, and she had me read it one more time and said, "What's a wireless operator?" And I said, "I don't know." She said, "Call the FCC and find out." So I called the FCC, and they said, "Oh, you have to go through the Canadian Communications, something like that."
Yeah.
And so I called there long before emails, right?
Yeah.
And I called there, and then the recording was French, right? So I hung up. And then I called again, and I wrote a letter, and I said that I was looking for my uncle, who was a wireless operator in Canada, and told the dates and gave all that information.
Yeah.
I got a letter back. It took a while, but I got a letter back, and only 3 people matched the description.
Oh, wow.
And I had my last name because it was on, and which I don't share, but it was on the back of my, the photo that I said was in my file, my only picture of me pre-adoption. My last name was on the back erased.
Oh, wow.
And then I confirmed that last name by going to the New York Public Library. They used to have all the birth register books. You used to be able to go through by date and county and look.
Yeah.
And then my name was there. So I confirmed that was my name.
Oh, wow.
And so then I reached out to the uncle, and he knew nothing about me. And I started saying, "Do you have a sister who went to America?" And he said, "Why, yes, I do."
Oh, wow.
And we confirmed that was my family, and I had found them. So it was pretty exciting for everyone.
Are your birth parents still around?
Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful.
My birth mom will come for Christmas this year.
Excellent.
And my birth father and I had a brief, we didn't stay in touch. It was just kind of troublesome. He was special forces, military, pretty tough guy. Yeah. I think that's why maybe I'm pretty tough, but
well, you've been through a lot. That's what I mean. And that's like, I know that's such a broad statement. Like, oh, you've been through a lot. That could mean anything. But I know why you're pretty tough. And I know why you're just tough, not even pretty tough after what you've been through. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's okay. So I know my half siblings. I never met my half siblings on my birth father's side. They just didn't want any part of it. Okay. And then I do know my half brother and my half sister on my birth mother's side. So We're not close, but we know each other, and there's no issues or
That's wonderful. And how about your adoptive mother? Is she still alive?
Yes, and she lives very close by.
Wonderful.
When I
So,
moved when I found my parents in the South, I moved to the South. I live in Georgia,
yeah.
and I picked it because it was in between both birth parents. But we took my adopted mom with us, so
Oh, great. So, I
yeah.
mean, if you guys live close by, I'm assuming that, you have a good relationship with her.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, there, as we get older and as you've spoken to people, I'm sure the reality kind of choices that were made
Mhm.
she's starting to reflect on those. So, and I'm honest about, yeah, that maybe that wasn't the best choice, but,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah.
hard. I mean, there's no sense in hurting someone,
No.
after all of these years have gone by. We're all okay.
Yeah.
That's the good news part of it. But she has regrets, and
Mhm.
and of course, my brother is a little bit
Yeah.
different than I am. My
Mhm.
adopted brother,
Yeah.
he I think is um, just now, which is crazy because you get to a certain age and you start to reflect on this stuff, but
Yeah.
you don't do it your whole life, and then all of a sudden it comes upon you, and you're like, "What?" Um,
Yeah.
but but he's suffering a little bit with it now, I think, and
Mm.
is not as much in touch with my mother.
I hope that, yeah, because I was going to ask about him. Well, I hope that he gets the help and healing resources that he needs because, as people will read in the book, he deserves it.
Yes, he
So,
does. Yes,
yeah.
he does. And he's a good guy, and he
Yeah.
has a daughter that graduated from college, and
Oh,
and he's
congratulations.
doing pretty well. It's
Yeah,
just that there's just he in fact, if you notice in the book, his face is blacked out of the
I
pictures.
did. I did.
He
Yeah.
and he asked, I gave him the choice. I said, "Do you want me to just take those pictures out?" Or he said, "No, you could just blacken my face out." Um, and I said, because he said, "I want to forget all of that. I don't want to be
Mm,
constantly reminded. I want to forget that all of that happened."
yeah. So, did you use a pseudonym for his name?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, I figured. Okay. Yeah, and I
Yep.
get it. I get it because, that's what's so hard about people telling their stories. No matter what story it is, it's going to affect other people. And
Yep.
that's what's so hard, but that's not to say you shouldn't tell your story. And just real quick about your adoptive mother, better late than never that she's starting to reflect on everything
Hmm.
because, yeah. So at least you have that, and I'm glad that she's close by for you. So just on the overall topic of emotional and narcissistic abuse, what is one thing that you would like the public to know and understand about emotional abuse?
Well, that it's just as damaging as physical abuse.
Yes.
That's very important for people to know. Um, because I was never physically abused.
Yeah.
But, you can't witness it and be in that state of fear constantly, and constantly on fighting, basically,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
your life, and not suffer from it. So it can be just as devastating. I think it is just as devastating,
Yeah.
but that you can heal from it,
Yeah.
and that we are not our parents' mistakes, so or your abuser's mistakes does not define you. That although I went through all of that abuse, I don't allow it to define me in any way. I want it to stop with me, right?
Good.
Yeah.
Good. And that's so important. I did want to say about the book that I think that it's a great portrayal of are narcissists, because just the way your father would just always want to be the center of attention and talk about the great gifts that he brought and things like that. I just saw just those examples were just so reminiscent of so many stories that have been told on this podcast and my experiences. So I recommend that people read The Killing Closet for many reasons, but there are a lot of textbook narcissist examples in it as well.
Yeah, it's throughout, right? Because the dinners.
It is.
Like,
yeah, the dinners.
We have to have the biggest, the most expensive dinner as long as it's someone else that's benefiting, right? And that he'll look like the hero.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I also just want to give you an opportunity to share the best way for people to connect with you, your website, social media, best place to purchase The Killing Closet.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
VLBrunskill.com is my site. I try to put any appearances, press, and all that good stuff on there. There's also a pretty extensive blog there, Adoption Find. It's within the VLBrunskill.com URL, which talks about a lot of the things that I went through, also about searching for your family and reuniting and all of that.
Wonderful.
And The Killing Closet is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, all those good places. I don't know what local bookstores it is yet, but I know it's online.
Yeah, if you can, try to get it. Support your local bookstore if you can. If not, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Wonderful. VL Brunskill, it's been a pleasure talking with you today. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and talking about The Killing Closet.
Thank you so much, Sarene. And I hope that, everyone out there has a happy, wonderful holiday and healing. I wish healing for all of them.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to my conversation with VL Brunskill on Emotional Abuse is Real. If you would like to connect with her or purchase her memoir, The Killing Closet, I've left a link to her website in the show notes. If you would like to share your own emotional abuse story here on the podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out at hello@sereneleadsrights.com or reach out via our Facebook page, Emotional Abuse is Real, or through Instagram at Sarene Leads Rights. Please note that this podcast should not be used as a substitute for professional mental health services. If you are a victim of emotional abuse and need help, please call or text the Suicide and Crisis Hotline at 988. Or call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You can also text START, S-T-A-R-T, to 88788. Once again, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Follow me on Instagram and on Facebook. Go grab my free download, 10 Things I Learned from Getting Paid to Watch TV. And if you can, please support us through our Buy Me a Coffee page. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.